the way I discovered neglect was, and this is a signature of neglect, where the people who I later came to identify as children of neglect, there was this signature shrug that kind of looked like this. And they said, nothing happened to me. And I thought, nothing. And they felt really bad about the fact that nothing that they could point to had happened to them. So why did they feel bad? And they felt shame about feeling bad, and they felt bad, and they felt confused about feeling bad, and they didn't know why. So this work is all about making something visible that has been invisible. And that's the problem. Secondly, many of us, and you may be one of them, find themselves in this story. And they discovered, oh, that's me. And they might get activated, or you might get activated. And if that happens for you, do what you need to do to be okay. And you all know what to do. So you can look at the recording if you get upset, and I'll tell you a little bit why we tend to find so many children of neglect in this field, but we'll get to that. Finally, I'll say that I'm on a mission, as I said, to sort of put out to the world that nothing is not nothing, but rather nothing is something and it really matters. So it's a new spin on the words nothing matters, because it does. So I'm going to start right in and tell you about why nothing matters. And I love this picture because this boy's face kind of sums it all up. And that is the feeling when we're not connected, when we don't have connection with someone that we love and feel loved by. It truly feels like nothing matters. And that is the experience of neglect, feeling alone, and the kind of ennui that comes with the experience of being disconnected. Why does why is this experience so profound? And this is really important. And I'm not going to make any attempt to minimize it. Attachment is a survival need. We need the other. We need the primary other. Not metaphor, but literally. They are food, they are shelter, they are warmth, they are protection from predators, and we depend on them to survive. And the withdrawal, the loss, the abandonment, or the simple absence of that primary other is experienced by that infant as life-threatening. This is not a metaphor, so you want to hold that in mind. This is ground zero, really important. So I came into the field shortly after PTSD appeared in the DSM. And in those days, there was no cross-pollination between brain and mind. So I didn't know anything about the brain until Bessel van der Kolk showed this slide in 1996. Now, 1990, or the 90s, were known as the decade of the brain. That's when we got the neuroimaging technology so we could look at the living human brain while it was working. And what Bessel and his group discovered was this, which I'll take you through very briefly. But the definition of trauma, it's not your bad day. The definition of trauma is the following: the stimulus is greater than what the organism is designed to process in its customary way. So the brain is basically hijacked. And what happens when the brain gets hijacked is this front part of the brain, which is the prefrontal area, the thinking part of the brain, goes offline. So you're not thinking anymore, you're not speaking. This is the verbal center. You have a little bit of visual firing, and what's really firing is this part of the brain, which is the fight flight response. So this person is running from a tiger, which means they cannot think or speak. They're overwhelmed, and they have various adaptations, which we're going to talk about more. But as we know from the previous slide, the experience of loss of the attachment with the other is an overwhelming experience. So it does hijack the nervous system. However, the infant cannot fight or flee. The infant doesn't have the power to fight off a person who is so much larger. They don't have mobility, they can't get away, so they're in what's known as the inescapable shock situation. And the inescapable shock situation is as follows. And you can use the example, well, this infant can't escape, can't fight this big person, so they're trapped there. They have two choices. The first one is what you see here on the left, which is playing possum or death feigning. And what they do is ratchet down all their bodily functions so low that the predator will think they're dead. Now, most predators are not interested in dead prey, so they lose interest and they look for something better to eat. And so the prey animal, this little possum, kind of reconstitutes itself, finds a safe place, and recovers and goes on about their day. That's the first option, which is death feigning or playing possum. The second option is the freeze response, where basically it's like a deer in the headlights. And what happens is they ratchet down their bodily functions so low that they won't feel the pain of being eaten. So they basically numb out completely, physically, emotionally, and they freeze and they feel nothing. And this later came to correlate with with the trauma experience of dissociation, which we'll come back to. But when I first saw this slide, this brain, in 2003, I was at a conference. I was in a room with several hundred therapists, and we were hearing present Ruth Lanius, who no one had ever heard of back then. She was really young. She was just graduated from Harvard Medical School, and she showed this slide, and I kid you not, the whole room looked at this slide at one time. She was explaining the inescapable shock situation, and the whole room full of therapists in unison just went, ah, this gasp, because it looks like the brain of a dead person. So that is the freeze response. So we learned there is more than fight or flight with the freeze response, with trauma, with overwhelming experience. We also have, besides fight flight, we have freeze, numbing, dissociation. Very important discovery. So another important person and the core of neglect trauma, and this you want to make sure and remember, and this little baby is one of my icons that I use throughout my work as the symbol of the dilemma without solution. This is Mary Main. I think of her as a local treasure. And Mary Main, not only did she coin and name the core of neglect trauma, which is the dilemma without solution, but she explained about the freeze response. She identified and named the fourth attachment style, which is the disoriented, disorganized attachment style. So I'm going to explain to you about the dilemma without solution because it is so much at the core of what we see with neglect. And the dilemma without solution is the following. The person that I need most in the world, my source of survival, and the source of abject terror, where I end up feeling like I'm going to die, is the same person. So the infant in this inescapable shock situation is faced with this dilemma of wanting to reach for and pull away and reach for and pull away and reach for and pull away at the same time, because they can't escape and they need this other. So even if they could escape, it would not be adaptive. It would not be in the service of survival to widen the distance between me and this other. So the inescapable shock situation faces us with this dilemma where you're reaching for, pulling away at the same time, which is overwhelming. So that is where we get traumatic dissociation, which is where the brain looks like this almost dead brain, completely numbed out. And that is the experience of the child, the infant, in the neglect stage, where the person is left alone, basically feeling like they're going to die, and they can't resolve this dilemma of reaching for, pulling away, reaching for. And what can an infant do? They can cry, and so the infant cries. Nobody comes. They reach. Nobody's there. And they're so tired out by the back and forth of reaching and pulling away and nobody coming that ultimately they collapse, exhausted. And their little brain is under firing, like this deadened brain. The brain, the infant brain develops in resonance, right hemisphere to right hemisphere, with that primary caregiver's brain. If there's no one there and they go into a freeze, we've got a very numbed out, under firing, slow brain. So that is the start in the world that this child has. Ultimately, the way they learn to survive is they withdraw.